digital artist for Cloud Imperium Games. Um, I've recently graduated within the last 6 months from the University of South Wales. But this slide show it's going to be called Education to Industry. Um, I'll be talking about quite a few topics. I'll be discussing sort of a few technical points, but also a lot of things that from a graduate perspective and someone from who's sort of just left in education, and I've actually spoken to a lot of recruiters and stuff, and I've been able to sort of find out what they want to see from graduate sort of portfolios or artwork, And so it's a nice mix of, sort of the general lessons that can be applied to anything, even if you're not a vehicle artist. This is a pretty good overall sort of discussion, I hope, on how teaching rules to sort of be fed into both. So just talk a bit about my pathway. So I studied at the University of South Wales, in which I got first. So I was there for 3 years, and I got a job offer from Cloud Imperium towards the end of my course. I've also had interviews for both playground games and expression games. However, I said the first company said yes. Cloud Imperium was that company, so I'm delighted to have joined Cloud Imperium. I joined Wheel Skills early on, which is I'm not entirely sure if you guys do World Skills or it's sort of a college degree thing or college level sort of art pathway, but that's quite useful. I've got a fair amount of freelance experience. I've got about 4 months freelancing experience, which I'll discuss in a moment, and how that applies quite importantly to what I'm going to discuss today. Um, so I was originally an environment artist, as my portfolio sort of shows, and then yeah, it was sort of a major switch going back to hard servers. So I'll be talking about the sort of mix between those two roles when I get to my role, a bit specifically at Cloud Imperium, as it's quite unique in how it handles its vehicle art role. Um, and also, I was a full Maya user for 3 years. I had never touched 3ds Max until I joined Cloud. I'm happy to say I've passed my probation. I've been brought up to date with Cloud with 3ds Max, and so I'll be talking a bit about that transition as well, and how it's not as daunting as many may seem. It's doable, especially in industry. You're not expected, especially as a graduate, to sort of know everything. And just to make it clear, like I'm not going to come to this talk and say I've got 18 years of industry experience. I've only got about 6 months worth, 10 if you're making my freelance. And so I sort of just want to try and be honest about this and just sort of about on how I approach things in my way. It's maybe people have got their own ways of doing things, different their own routes into industry. But this is just my personal experience and just what I've heard a lot of my own tutors talk to me about, and my own peers at work as well. So just quickly, my previous working experience was a freelance artist at Jam Creative. It was a very much smaller studio than Cloud. It's about 7 people in the roof, well, in like the attic of like an old like sort of house. It was quite an interesting time, but this is like incredible experience. So just so people are aware, like when I had my interview at Cloud, this is possibly the most discussed topic over about an hour and a half interview. This is easily about half of it. Um, and I hope that sort of goes to show that even whether, um, I'm actually not fully clued up on Star Citizen, neither Squadron as a game, personally. I was sort of new to that whole world before I joined. I learned a lot about it, and I'm still learning about the whole universe as it goes. But this is sort of a nice segue into how you can apply for roles in which you're not fully clued up on, but also having just any working background. This is completely on the opposite spectrum of Cloud Imperium, right? So I was creating very low poly environment and asset packs, very low poly, extremely optimized. Basically developing apps for your iPhone. Using loads of modularity, loads of trim sheets. But it just goes to show that sort of these roles, although they might seem, you might want to work for a bigger company, this is so paramount in just working like studio culture. Even if it's 7 people, it still shows, you can work as part of a team with designers, with sound people. Source control is a big one that I feel is sort of jumped about upon, and just understanding why we use that and what it is quite important. And having, so game jams always incredible for this. I'll talk about this a bit later on. But I'm assuming staff does quite a lot of stuff like this. It wasn't so much at USW. We had one or two. but I just want to really emphasize that importance. So yeah, so this is my sort of previous 3D experience at Gem Creative, which was a small studio in Cardiff. So onto Cloud Imperium. So my job at Cloud Imperium is essentially to take the concepts. So if not many of you know, Star Citizen is a massively multiplayer space simulator. I assume, guess is what you call it. Um, it's been in development for too long. It's been about, I think, maybe 12 or 13 years. Um, from since, which is crazy to think, and it's gone. We've had concepts from years ago in which we still haven't fledged out or made, and this is where my job comes in, and it's to basically take that concept and make it into fully workable sort of, it's a ship you can fly in the game. Um, so part of my role depends on as well on a lot of communication between lots of departments. This ranges from design to VFX to sound, and I'll talk a bit about this. The ship on the left was my first sort of project um, at Cloud Imperium, which is called the Anvil Paladin, and I'm excited to talk about that to you guys for sure. So this released about 3 weeks ago. I had some help in working on the exterior of the ship, and this is my first point at Cloud Imperium, so which my role as vehicle artist is quite narrow, as well. It's not just vehicles. We technically we have all these ships have fully fledged out environments. So this is my first live industry project. It was like a really amazing sort of thing. At my time here, this will be probably like one of my greatest projects because it was my first. And although we haven't shipped the game, technically this is how I feel like when another company ships a game, right? But I love this project. So Anvil is quite sort of the military faction of South Citizen. From its RSI sort of counterparts. Um, so on this, I was working for it as sort of on my onboarding, and then over the last few months, so I joined during the start of Greybox. So I'll be talking about those processes a bit further on and what they exactly mean. But you could probably guess some of the terms as like white box. It's very similar to, well, how everyone knows a white box. It's very much no conclusive geometry or nothing like that. And then you go into Greybox, which is your sort of finalized geometry and forms, and you've got the art style down. And then it moves on to Lot Zero. So Lot Zero is basically how it should look when you just look at it right up close. So Lot Zero is all of its decals applied, all of its materials, all of the interactions should be working, which brings up to my point for talking to designers and talking to sound and talking to VFX is really common as part of my daily role. And talking to my art directors and my leads and talking about and getting feedback. Something I'll bring on a bit sort of further on when I talk about the general topics of surrounding environment art and how I approach things. But yeah, so this is my first project, and I was primarily working on the interior of the ship. So I just want to have a quick segue into the common workflows at CRG. For who may know, we use primarily hard surface sort of workflows, especially on the vehicle team at CRG. So we have environment roles, and they primarily use the foliage and all that good stuff. But on the vehicle team, it's primarily just doing all of the hard surface elements within the ships. So we use a hard surface workflow. So this means a lot of weighted chamfers, tiling textures, and we use a lot of decal sheets using parallax occlusion mapping. So this is a fundamental part of the workflow at CRG, and it's something I've sort of learned and adapted using over time. And it's instead of having geometry for everything, you can really use a lot of these sort of decals and their floating planes with opacity, and it's all height driven to give the illusion of depth. And I have a good example on the slide after this. So we use a lot of tiling textures, a lot of mechanical animation, a lot. It's quite good to have that freedom and be able to sort of do complex, interesting animation. I'm pretty sure on the job role actually it says that it's a good to have a fundamental knowledge of mechanical, understanding. And I didn't before I joined, but you can learn that very quickly, and it's very useful. So one of my tasks was to make the landing ramp. So on the Paladin, you open the door, and basically a big ramp falls out, and it's the mechanism of that. I unfortunately don't have a video of that at the moment, but if you just look at a video, you'll be able to see it, and just making sure that everything that it looks like it works, and when it comes to this, I'll bring up a quite good point in which I don't think I highlighted later on. So I'm going to bring it up now, which is function should always inform design when it comes to sci-fi. It's something I was first taught by all my leads, just that simple statement. Function informs design always. And that's not even just for sci-fi, you know. That can be sort of for any sort of topic or characters or anything like that. But it's super important, you know, if you just look at any project you're making or that I even used to make. I didn't even think about this until up till now, but it's super useful and it really makes sense, right? And it's sort of making sure that everything feels believable. There's no unnecessary detail. Of course, it's a sci-fi game, you know. It's you sort of have fun and be able to sort of have bare bones sort of geometry and interesting deals laying about, especially when it's to certain manufacturers. So if you're unaware, it's Star Citizen, each ship basically comes as its own manufacturer, or a lot of them, and they like specific brands almost, like you know, like BMW, or like Ferrari, or like you know, just or like Fiat, or like all of these sort of different companies have different styles on how they brand their cars, and it's very similar to Star Citizen, but in a sci-fi perspective, right? So we have like you know like luxury ships, or we have military ships, which is what the Paladin, which is what you're looking at here, and looking at you know just how we could use those sort of like language and just using that sentence to sign sorry function informs to sign to really make some good decisions on how you approach things. And I believe it can just it's led to me making better art, and I hope it can lead you guys to me making better art. It's super useful to know. um so another misunderstanding about sort of these images that you're seeing is that a lot of these things are interactable. So, for example, the communal seating area you can see in the bottom picture. There's a lot of go back and forth between game designers, and to which you know it's good to be vocal about. To you need to be able to talk to people in this role. It's really important. You know, we have many an introvert in the office. I consider myself one of them. This is sort of my first sort of thing to get into better public speaking. But you know, being able to sort of handle yourself, be able to talk to designers, be able to talk to VFX about how you want things to act and how you want things to look can be really helpful. You know, and at the end of the day, everyone in the games industry, from what I've met, have been lovely. It's a very small industry. You know, you'll get found out pretty quickly. I've heard some horror stories. Um, and this will come onto a later slide, but just presenting yourself nicely and just being kind to everyone. You know, in whatever public form that may be, Discord, ArtStation, LinkedIn. Just be nice. You know, people will remember nice interactions for sure. I've had it a few times where, you know, well, I've heard stories of people just being sort of general, not very nice people in both studios and both in interviews, and like it's really been detrimental to them as well because a lot of these big studios talk. It's so small, smaller than many people think, and something that I've only just realizing. But that's just another little segue I wanted to get to a bit later on. But yeah, so the main software we use, so we use Star Engine, which is a highly modified version of the Crytek 3 engine. So that's been, you know, again, another software I had to fully learn by sort of from scratch, with obviously help from onboarding and stuff. But I hope this sort of gives you a perspective in not to be scared to try and learn new things. You know, usually if the learning curve is not that steep, especially in terms of 3D packages, they all do the same thing. Realistically, it's what you put into it, right? Of course, some tools might be better, or some tools might be better for certain things. But you know, I can happily say what I can do in Maya now, I can do in 3ds Max, if not better, and vice versa. You know, it's all about a time game, and you know, if you ever, it's good to learn, and it gives you a bit of an advantage when competing against other people for certain jobs, is to know more software. But also, if you don't want to, don't feel pressed to do so, because when I joined, I said I don't know Max, and they said we will teach you. Basically, it's a thing that lots of studios do. Um, but yeah, so these are some of the most common softwares used. So I want to quickly go over again the crossover between environment and vehicles and how my role at a vehicle correlates to that. So lighting is a really big one. Something you wouldn't really expect from a vehicle role. You would think sort of a lot of hard surface modeling, which don't get me wrong, there's a lot of that, but lighting is such an important part, especially with the interiors of these ships. It makes it, you know, super important, believable, and you can have your own spin on things. In the concepts, there's usually not a lot of lighting information, and if so, the concepts might be a few years old, so you can really just sort of adapt to this and do your own lighting. So for lighting, you're currently seeing on the top photo was primarily done by me and a colleague of mine, super talented. And I believe sort of the reference we used on this was almost like the inside of like a submarine, like a military submarine. It's quite foggy, it's quite misty. Red lights to sort of accentuate really important points. Um, which is something that's really good for environment art as well. Is highlighting certain important, like, what you call it, like points of interest or POIs with lighting. It's super important, and it's something I've only recently knew. It's a sort of game design principle. From what I've been told, it's highlighting players towards very key objects, and this works in an art sense as well. You could really use it to push forward sort of the style you want to go for and how you light things. But also, there's a lot of material creation at Cloud. I've been using Designer and Painter recently to do sort of like paint work and sort of some more interesting things, which people may not think of when it comes to environment roles, or sorry, vehicle roles. And so we use both a mid poly workflow for both interior and exteriors. There's not ever really a high amount of high to low poly baking. Mid poly is quite new for me, especially. I did a lot of high to low when in my university was, and although it's really good to learn, don't be scared to go mid poly. Texture budgets are really important. Geometry budgets are sort of falling off. It's still very good to have optimized geometry, and it shows you're able to make optimized geometry. But like try counts, for example, are very, very flexible at the moment, especially with new engines and new consoles. It's really growing. And so the one thing that we want to do, and this is what mid poly is so good for, is um, reserving texture budget. So textures are really important. And so I'll talk about how parallax occlusion mapping. So we use trim sheets and decal sheets used in parallax occlusion mapping, and I'm just gonna quickly go over what I mean by this, as it's super important in Cloud Imperium and it's a fundamental part of our workflow. And this is used for all sort of aspects, right? It can be used on organic environments. I've used it for dirt, I've used it for brick walls. But we use it at Cloud primarily for basically all our trim sheets and all of our decals. So it's basically a way to add depth detail using height maps. It's with normal maps, they can sort of fall in which there's not a lot of height information to go off them. It sort of gives you a bit of a bump in detail, but it sort of flags and be able to either catch really a lot of depth in shadows, which is like the primary thing with how POM catches light. We at Cloud have quite a famous sort of POM shader in which does it exceptionally well, probably one of the best in the industry when it comes to sci-fi design. And it's basically a way of how we add sort of panels and sort of cuts and extrusions and sort of rivets in every part of our model for both interior and exterior. There's obviously sort of a mix between, sometimes if you want like really big details, you can do that with Geo. But of course, we use a lot of POM. So, for example, the image underneath, which is currently the floor that I made for the Ample Paladin, none of that is geometry. All of that is a flat plane. It's all used making basically a tiling POM sheet. So every single cut you see is literally just like a strip cut in with a POM. So it's basically just simulating depth. So it's basically not going to fall apart. Like, when you walk over it, it looks fully 3D. It's quite surreal. Um, and now Palm Shader is the best in the world because when you get close to it, it doesn't show really. You have to really push it and like have a floating palm and look underneath it to see the fact it's a plane and not geometry. But this is something super useful to learn. There's so much like extra things I could teach you about, but realistically, there's so much information about this sort of workflow online. It works for all types. I highly recommend it. It sort of beats. It's like a nice mix between having that. Sometimes normal maps don't cut it, especially for environment stuff like grass. You look at it and you go, "There's not a lot of depth here," but this is a really good way of simulating that really well. You can do this all in Unreal and stuff, by the way. This is not just a Star Engine thing, so I really recommend it. So I'm now going to get into a few sides about more so general sort of lessons and topics that I wish I knew, or the stuff that I sort of feel like I did in university, in which maybe some other people lacked, and it's what I've been told that really helped me push for this job at CIG. I've talked to my recruiters about this who recruited me, and they said these are some of the things that really sort of stood out in your art test or your portfolio, etc. So I just want to sort of go through these points real quick, and I'm hoping that sort of people in here who are not environment or vehicle light specifically. I hope there's some, you know, this is hopefully a sort of a nice sort of branching topic I can speak about. So feedback is king. A lot of people know this, but maybe not in the correct way. Especially from a university standpoint. We was always encouraged to have that peer-to-peer feedback between the university and like higher year groups, which is good, right? However, with the amount of resources, the amount of people in the industry right now, it's never been easier to actually get some really good feedback from industry professionals very easily, very quickly. And this also goes into the whole networking. I don't like that word, but sort of that networking, like approaching people, asking them about how they do certain things. Um, you know, Industry practices like feedback is all, since I joined, everything was feedback. Everything, every day was this could be better, do this differently, blah 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 blah. It is something that's really helpful, especially coming from industry professionals, so you'll be able to get really good feedback, not just feedback for saying that something looks weird that you sort of don't know what to do with that information. Usually industry professionals will be able to very much go and say, right, this doesn't look good for this reason, change this. Whereas when I was in university, I don't know if some of you can agree on this, but when you sort of ask for feedback from like a peer group or like a support network, sometimes it can just be a bit like not forced, but just you're not sure where that feedback's coming from. But if you sort of listen to it from someone with more of a voice of reason, I guess, with how many years in the industry, it can really help. It helped me. I was very outspoken. I approached lots of people on ArtStation, which is what I recommend. ArtStation is a really good one. It's a bit less informal, if you like. Or sorry, a bit more informal than LinkedIn. People are lovely in the industry, right? Like for example, someone from left, I spoke to someone from Ubisoft, and on the right was someone from Rockstar Games who are alumni from my old university. But they were like so lovely and to be able to give me like so much detail, like in my projects, and they're more than happy to help, especially alumni. I'm aware that staffs has some really good alumni. Don't be scared to reach out to them early as well. First, second, third year, don't be scared. All feedback is good feedback. Especially in your first and second years, I really wish this is something I changed. As I only did this really in my third, but like, you can really upskill really quick by just, following these steps and talking to people. But just this is an emphasis on connect to the industry as much as you can, truly. When whatever sort of subsector in characters, environments, anything, it's so helpful. And I just want to put a heavy emphasis on this. Time tracking is a weird one. So it's something that I saw a lot of my peers at university sort of struggle with, and it's super important. And I'm just learning the importance of it, especially at my time at Cloud, in which time tracking is super important as we have to hit deadlines, and it's all at the same university with deadlines as well. However, they're usually quite a lot bigger, and so like basically the whole point I want to get across with time tracking is even if you don't do everything by the books, it's just turning these really large projects into more manageable pieces, and it also allows you to prioritize your tasks correctly. If that's the sort of I'm not saying like it's just good to see how much time you're spending on something, and then looking back and seeing like right, I'm not really making progress with a specific bit. I should go back and either get more feedback on it, or just trying to understand why things are not working out. There's usually a reason. um you know if, like, for example, quality of my artwork, I look back and I go, right, what was the problem here? It was usually because I spent too much time on one particular thing, and then everything else got off balance and offset. And so there's a few pieces which I made where something looks really good, and then all the rest sort of stacks behind, especially from a university standpoint, because you don't really revisit these projects again afterwards, which is something I did. I'm not you. It might be different for you guys, but you know, time tracking is super important. Please do it. It's super helpful. Google Calendar, and also just it's good as well. For my art test, I had to time track every hour I spent on my art test. Um, and so it's just a good habit to get into for sure, especially for industry, as it's super important as you sort of time to time, and time is just really important to keep track of in general, right? This is a big one, and this is something I really heavily emphasize, and I don't see quite often. I'm seeing it pop up a bit now, this is super important, right? So going small and quality over quantity. I've had a few people approach me recently and they sort of have so much stuff on their portfolio, so much stuff, and you're like, whoa, okay. So the quality of each individual thing sometimes just might not be great. Unfortunately, right? It's how it is. You can't be an asset churner, especially I'm talking in sort of these bigger industries, these bigger studios. For generous roles and sort of indie, you might be looking at a different way, especially if you're doing loads of different things. Um, but if you're just an vehicle eyes or just an environment eyes, this is super important. Um, just because I have understanding of how these big projects can just become so complicated so quickly, and it's something where you know basically to say it is it's easier to scale up than down. My tutor used to say this, yours might as well, but just to emphasize a point really, and it's super important that however sensible you think your project is, it's not half it. I've had this so many times. Like you know, going as small as you can, right, and making something as so like high quality. It will be so much more impressive. For example, this scope down project on the screen at the bottom right. I would have, if looking back now, I would have just done the boat. I would have just done the boat, and it would have been the best boat with all like a tiny bit of these elements. You know, I really didn't scale down enough. As you can see on the left, this is the same project, which is crazy, right? But I made back that time by scaling down my project, and I had more time to really focus on the quality. I am aware that if I was stayed to this scope of my project, I would not have the quality I had. Especially in a university, you don't have years to go on with a project. You're sort of given deadlines. So this is my final major project, and I was just really emphasizing the point on scale down. Don't be afraid to rescale. You'll get back that time in dividends if you scope down. It's super important, truly. I can sort of go by the words of like my colleagues as well, and they say the same thing. Is that they see a lot of students with very big projects and not a lot of direction. Even if you think you have direction, like sort of big cityscapes as one. Like me, for example, I've been there, right? I've been like, I can do this big city because of my third year, and I can do everything. Blah blah blah. It's not the case, really. Quality over quantity, absolutely, any day of the week. Even for environment stuff, where you're sort of expected to know a lots of sort of general, um, like topics like foliage and materials, that is still achievable by breaking down something that's so small. Something very useful. Just a quick little tip: whenever you start a good project, get your camera down as soon as possible, whatever it is, and that can really help you strict things down. Like, for example, I didn't have a set camera for these two pieces, and I was just like, oh, I'll just scale it. It looks better if I scale it up, make it bigger, make it bigger. If you just have like, if you're doing a prop, if you're doing like a cup, right? If you have that camera set, and that is exactly how you want your project to look like, that's how you should do it. So, for example, the scope down project, if you was to move that camera backwards about 20, like 5 centimeters, it collapses, right? Everything around this camera frame is complete. It's just nothingness. It's all just completely screwed up, which is good because you want to just make everything towards that camera. You're not expected to be able to make a fully living environment. There's teams that do that, and you want to be part of that team. So your best thing is to be able to just sort of make really good small focused props, and really use your camera angle to hide the weaknesses in your work, which is what I do a lot. Like you'll find it funny, but like this landscape doesn't, it barely tiles it bit, but it's the workflow and your understanding of how these things work, which is super important. But yeah, just to emphasize that point, go small and quality over quantity any day of the week, truly. This is also another one. That I see some students not make enough of a use on. And it's something the university is really good because they sort of expect this from you in sort of a way of a journal or how they mark work and put in a lot more effort. Or I've seen sort of portfolios that don't even have this at all. Breakdowns so matter so much and are super important and very helpful for everyone, including yourself, including people who would just take interest in your work. It's helpful for recruiters. Instead of thinking about, oh, how did they do this or that, or trying to explain it to them in an art test or an interview. Just being able to say, show them a slide and say, look, this is what I did. This is how I did it. Giving them like step by step. It's really useful. Like, so it basically just gives recruiters a way to allow you to they get to know how you think before the interview stage. It's super important. It's like the first hit, right? Like, if a recruiter looks at your like any portfolio, they have to go through so many of them for just saying, "Oh wow, okay, this is exactly what we're looking for in this breakdown." Let's give a let's give it an interview, right? It's super useful. It's also a way that it can give you like a chance to reflect on your own work and how to improve your own work processes. It's super important overall, and it just gives you a bit of insight into thinking, right, how could I have done this better, or how did I do this? How this looks really good. How did I do this? It's sort of lost in university projects, I feel, especially about mine when I did my first like few, and I was like, how did I do this again? You just got a painter file with like 8 million like folders, and you're like, right, okay, I have no idea. But just having just like this sort of a nice breakdown just really helps, personally, in my opinion. Works in progress is super important, and this sort of goes back to my point of having already a set camera angle. It's super important. Being able to show your like method of working, your quality over time. It's a nice sort of reminder of what you're working for, what you're striving for. This is super important. Have whips. Have a GIF. This is better. That's better. This is like 4 or 5 pictures. So I've just put on here as an example. But having like a nice GIF towards the end of an ArtStation post showing like step 0 to 10, like picture by picture, having the same camera angle, so it's not like a weird like GIF where all like the resolutions change at different times. It's super helpful, and it also allows you to think, right, could this look better? Like if you think about it in terms of a whip, but like what is your end goal? I think it's something that sort of I struggle with. It's when I'm working on the project, I'm like, right, unless I'm following a strict reference, I'm like, what am I missing here? Like, what is the end goal of this? And this helps. Taking periodic screenshots, it's good for getting feedback on, especially from like professionals, because you already have that nice sort of camera angle that's set already. And sort of industry, and if you approach the industry and just say, hey, look, like, put in a Discord, which I'll talk about in a minute, like industry Discords are super useful. Like being able to say, oh, look, how does this look? Can I change maybe not the camera angle, but just the work itself, right? It's super useful. And again, it hides all the really bad work, which I am more than happy admitting that some of this will start great, like underneath some of the tiling textures were a bit wrong, blah blah blah, but it just helps, right? At the end of the day, it's the ArtStation post, it's the thumbnail that you really want to crack down. And I know it's a bit of a backwards sentence, like an environment artist should be making these fully blown environments, and at the end of the day, it's not really the case, especially for these bigger studios. You'll be working as part of a massive team creating really small created elements of them. So, truly, whips are really important. This is another one. This was really emphasized by a friend of mine at Clown Imperium, who's a senior vehicle artist. And fundamentals are important, and it's something that sort of lacks, that it's lost in a lot of work, especially student work. It's really easy to see a pretty picture, the cyberpunk alley, the weapon, the tree, the texture, and just think, I'm going to recreate that exactly how it is, without understanding the full fundamentals of what they've done or how they've come to accomplish that, whatever it is, right? So, and also at the end of the day, right, recruiters are starting to see this, especially I've had recruiters at my work, and they sort of see it, right? If you look at a portfolio and it's like directly ripped from a tutorial, they can really spot it, you know. But just this is truly like, we should really have fun learning these things about the fundamentals. Like for example, something I'm still learning, like for example, designer, it's something I'm still really into, and I'm learning every day about what a node does, like the bare bones, how does this work and how can I conform it to what I need? It's way more easier than that. Don't get me wrong, tutorials are amazing and I've used them all the time. But what I like to feel like, for example, a lot of these textures that I've used in my own personal work, a lot of them are tutorials. You have the setups, but being able to sort of understand the fundamentals allows you to change it so much so that it is now yours. Fundament like designers really, really good at this, to be able to create a complete grand spank new texture using the exact same snub tutorial. But just learning these like just fundamentals is so key, especially when it comes to cloud. and it all goes back, right, for, especially from a concept point of view, like shape language and design language and how you can sort of influence that, and like photography and filmography, looking at films and how, like a few of my camera shots were made from certain films, and like color and grading, it all comes from somewhere, right? And it's this sort of sentence of saying, don't reinvent the wheel. Sometimes things work because they're meant to work. Films look great because it's a law. It's like, this is a rule. You got to do the golden ratio and all this really interesting stuff about lighting and stuff, right? Sometimes you can just look at these rules and make it and apply it to your own work, and it looks incredible instead of trying lots of random stuff that doesn't really work, especially when it comes to like lighting and camera angles and stuff. Fundamentals are there, just research them. And don't reinvent the wheel. This comes to everything, right? You know, if there's a way everyone's been using for years to make like interesting damage in Painter, there's not really a reason to make a really complicated shader graph in Blender that does all this fancy stuff that doesn't really equivalent to anything important. Because at the end of the day as well, it comes back into the point that studios value time, spending hours and hours and days at making really interesting, unless you're like a tech artist maybe. I'm not that from that background, but they sort of look more into this, but from an art perspective, being able to take what's existing, the fundamentals of that, and really make something special from it in your own way is super unique, right? This is the only really example I can think of in my own head, but it sort of comes to everything, like the Blender donut. Like make it yours, whatever it is, make it unique, and just use the fundamentals to sort of build on top of what's already been made. It's super useful. This is just a quick segment into just being active in the 3D space. I can assume a lot of you already are, but just for the people who maybe, sort of feel like they're lacking on this and don't feel like they're talking to as many people as they should be, it's super important. Everyone in the games industry is lovely. They're there for a reason. You don't get hired if you're not a nice person, realistically, right? you know, and just having been able to when people look at you, they go, I've seen you before, or like for example, all my portfolio, my LinkedIn and my application and my CV, they're all the same. They all have the same formatting, layout, same picture, same project, which is that Chinese temple, which even if it's quite old at this point, it's still like people look at it and they go, that's his work. And it's sort of the project that people see me by. They go, oh, you did the temple, blah, blah, blah. And having a project like that really helps. And just being consistent in your branding, right? Because at the end of the day, it's trying to get into the head of whoever is trying to interview you. Realistically, right? You sort of want to leave that impressed, like that touch. And if everything's consistent, bright photo, it's clearly you. Like don't be scared to approach people. And, like consistent branding really helps, and it makes it easier for like other artists to find you, and industry professionals to find you as well. And it makes you more approachable at the end of the day. And yeah, just a quick one: join as many 3D discords as you can. And like people will remember you as well when you join these discords. A lot of recruiters and a lot of studio professionals are there, so just remember, at the end of the day, it's good to be active in these. It's sort of a big step, I understand. Don't be scared to show your work to industries. You're a student. I was a student. I'm still am a student. I'm still learning every day, right? And I still get looked at. The only difference is that now my lead comes behind me and says, "Oh, this feedback." It's the same thing. It's gonna happen. You know, you're you're not always gonna be top dog. You sort of gotta keep on learning. But being in these discords, communicating with people is super helpful. Just to snap them off. If you want to take a screenshot of this slide to wherever you are, take a screenshot. Search them up. They all have discords, really big discords. I put them in for a reason. And there's a lot more as well. I'm assuming if you probably are in a lot more as well. But like for example, I had a friend who has his entire FMP basically curated by a guy from like fucking Ubisoft, right? And it was like fantastic because he always just every day he would be able to get like a paragraph or two of feedback just on being in the Discord and being communicative and talking to someone. It's super important. So please, it's super like helpful and really important. And just a quick segment into what I call, well, me and my friend called the free bar theory, and it's something he just recently taught me about coming to SIG. And so it's a good way, it's a good simple way to gauge the quality, the standard of your asset, character, environment using three simple bars. You can add bars, you can lower them, but this is a good way of just a metric, and it's basically saying that the one before, the bar before cannot be better, cannot be worse than the one after. So, you know, we're really, are you ever going to see ever a really bad model with really bad UVs have amazing textures? It's sort of like it's a slope, it's a downward slope, and our goal as artists is to maintain it. You don't want to have better UVs on a model because then it will sort of sacrifice that end product, right? And this is a good way to when you're thinking of something. It's super simple, right? Like I have it a post-it note, right? Whenever I do anything, like project wise nowadays. And I sort of look at these bars and I go, I can really find the problem with what I'm doing. If I can just tell myself something is wrong here, and I go back, oh, the model's not that great, you know. And of course, all these lessons bounce off each other. You go to industry and then you learn the fundamentals, and it's just a good way of just upskill really quickly. Upskilling is really important, and to never get sort of die down is to always be learning. You want to improve these bars, you want to make them higher, more green with however you use it. Um, and just as a thing, you can make these bars as big as you want. It could be super complicated, and at the end of the day, there's so many moving parts to projects, but it's still good, right? You can't have they all go in succession, and the one before could not be worse than the one after, and vice versa. And it's super important, right, when it comes to certain cameras. You can make an amazing, you can go everything green, 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 and then the render is just poor, right? You just haven't used any fundamentals. There's not the correct camera. The lighting looks a bit strange. You know, just this is super important, and I'll be happy to give the slides to anyone. Take photos, take screenshots. I can highly recommend it from someone who's currently working at CRG, and the people who recommended it for me are also from CRG, and also different companies. Like I said, I am good friends with people from Expression and both Playground and a few others, and yeah, they just say the fundamentals are super important, and this is a good way to gauge that and to understand the flaws in your own work, especially after you've had industry sort of comment on it and you approach people and ask for feedback. It's very and it's nuanced, but overall, quality is when everything works nicely. You know, there's always going to be something that makes a project look strange. This is a good way to test that. And if you put these bars against one of your own projects and you think, right, and also being honest with yourself, and I could just say green, 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 but if you're being honest with yourself, sort of reflect on the other work out there. It's a tough competition. It's brutal, but having fun in this process, learning from people, talking to industry, sort of trying to get that next leg up is super helpful. And personally, if I had this, I think I would have drastically upskilled way more quickly in the 3D space. But yeah, so this is the end of my slideshow. So I hope you all enjoyed it. Thank you so much. I know we're gonna do a bit of Q&A. I'm here for however long people want me to be. I have nowhere to go. So, but yeah, thank you so much anyway, guys. Oh, yeah, yeah, of course. Yeah, 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 of course. Let me just quickly get it up. Let's see. So, I'll bring up this point, especially for this is mostly people into vehicles, especially. It's like finding inspiration in like real world aerospace, and I think you asked this question, and I sort of just wanted to adhere to. I'm very honest with saying I was not fully like, I didn't work at like Boeing before I joined, right? These topics are things that people like you could be taught this, especially in industry, right? And so like knowing like before I joined Cloud, I was aware that there was like manufacturers in the game and how like ships look and how like military ships look more militaristic. There's a design language over here, and this falls into that lesson of fundamental knowledge of learning stuff, but like making sure that you know, what you do is always grounded in fundamental shape design, especially like all the concept artists that work talk about this all the time. Is that, function informs design, and especially at Cloud, where you really want a military ship to look different from a really fancy like Porsche designed ship, right? Like Origin. I think it's the best brand example I can say. But that's super important.
Do you get any like impact on that when you're working with like the concept team? Like
Yeah, so it's like as I said, a lot at Star Citizen, a lot of the concepts are quite old, and also we're also sometimes limited by our actual gameplay, as in, like, we make a ship for a gameplay feature that's not in the game yet. It sounds very bizarre, but it's something that happens. We have components now, which are sort of an extra thing in which we need to do, from in which, if you shoot at a ship, like, your sort of, like, your cooler can sort of break, you have to go repair it, which is still not a function in the game. It's something that Star Citizen is known for, but, we have to sort of make the art for that, and you have to make it function as if it was working. And there's something called gold standard now, which is basically updating all of the old ships to our new current standards of how they work with components and all that stuff. But to go back on your point, it's if like the creative freedom, yeah, for sure, because a lot of these sort of aspects, especially on older ships, and we need new things for it, concepts are not usually done for that usually. And also some concept might be outdated, and also like talking with the concept team is really useful. Especially I do it a lot of the time as well. And of course, like everyone, like the people at CIG is super lovely, and I've seen them talk to other people like students, right? And they're more than happy to sort of look at projects and say what's wrong with something or what's good with something. There's yin and yang to both, but yeah, we have a lot of more creative expression that people might see. The Paladin was especially a big one. A lot of it was especially like Sasa did like all of like the roofing, so that was like I was able to have the full creative expression to make that sort of like ring on the top that's seemingly connected to the turret. But yeah.
um one of my friends has a question.
Mhm.
They've not put it in the chat though.
That's it.
He's asking how do you recover from like burnout when losing like passion for your work?
Yeah, it's a tricky one.
Kind of a deep question.
Mm? Yeah, it's
It's quite a deep question. Yeah.
yeah, for sure. I mean, everyone's experienced it though. My tutors are even aware of this, right? Have a break. Shoot, like it is useful. Um, like there's a sort of misconception maybe about like discipline and being burnt out sometimes. It's always good to sort of have a break sometimes. Um, and realistically, like sometimes, even if I felt burnt out, I had the sort of discipline to still do it. It's a bit of a tricky one for sure. Like from a personal standpoint now, I, I mean, I play a lot of video games. Everyone does, right? We wouldn't be doing game course otherwise. But you know, doing stuff that's not necessarily related to games really helps. Going out,
Yeah.
hang with friends. I think people say, "Oh, I'm gonna play a game and have a break." It's nice to sort of just get out sometimes and just not be looking at a screen in general. I feel it now. But also another point when it comes to, unfortunately, it's tricky industry. And when I was in university, the way I personally looked at things, it's a bit brutal maybe, but I wanted a job in the industry, you know, and I was able to work 40 hours in retail before. Like, why wouldn't I do 40 hours a week doing 3D? And the answer I had for myself was there wasn't really an answer, an excuse for it. You sort of do it even if you don't want to, but you sort of like have that reward, that redeeming feeling after you're done, and you think, wow, I put in all that time and I've really made something great here. It's difficult to see in the
Yeah.
moment. It's super important. There's obviously balances, by the way. Really do chill out a lot. And when you chill, properly chill, forget about anything to do with art, which is something that people might go, I'm going to chill out from a project, I'm going to do an easier bit of art. I personally don't believe it. Just stop. take a break, for a day or two, come back to it and just feel replenished. But when it comes to sort of, I try not to be demoralized. I really try and, well, I used to put in a lot of hours into my work. And at the end of the day, I mean, dedication really beats talent a lot of the time. Um, as many hours as you can. I also work during university, so I understand that there's so many other factors that come into this. But if you really want something, putting in the graft to do it, it's super important. But of course, there's a
Yeah.
caveat to that, right? Do chill out. Everything in balance, truly. But yeah,
I mean, I think from like a student perspective, there's all this pressure to like have portfolio projects on your own and then be doing student work and then be consistently up to date on everything that's going on in industry. And I
yeah,
think it can get quite a lot
of
very
course,
fast.
yeah, yeah, for sure. But in that respect, like I think my sort of point of scope helps. You sort of look at what I like to do, and something I sort of entail a lot of people to do is whatever job you want, look at the portfolio of the guy who's doing it, and look at before all of their industry projects and look at their projects, because usually they're not like like even like alumni at USW. Sorry, is a rock star there. He's an environment artist, a rock star, and his projects like. I look at them now and they're doable, and this is before all of his, the fancy, like rock star thumbnail, on the ArtStation post. Like, really look, and that helps you scope things down, right? Don't try and be everything. Look at the job you want. Look at the people who are doing it. Be inspired by their portfolio and look at the techniques they're using, because usually that stuff doesn't go out of date. They're in that job for a reason because of the workflows they used. Like, especially when it comes to vehicle art, right? The really common one is mid poly, 3ds Max, paint the texturing. Like, don't try something different. It's a bit, it's a bit of a weird one. I feel a bit brutal saying that, but it is true. If you're applying for a field artist job and you've got a random character just because you want to try and do it, and you go, well, it's quite confusing, And also a
Yeah.
lot of these portfolios that I say that people from industry are using, they're very tailored, they're very specific. I was fortunate enough to just be a hard surface artist originally, and I feel like I got quite good at that. And then I switched to environment, and thankfully at cloud, it's the combination of both roles, which
Yeah.
is like the primary thing. It's because they both matter. But if I was to go, for field artists at Rockstar, it's probably very different, and my portfolio wouldn't be handled that well, probably, just because of the lack of quality in my hard surface stuff. So it's sort of knowing the boundaries. If you look at you can look at art tests and stuff as well. They're quite common. Um,
Did did you
yeah,
tailor your portfolio to cloud?
no,
Oh no. No.
absolutely not. I had not a single bit of sci-fi in my portfolio, but it was because of all my hard surface elements that both, as I say, cloud sort of the crossover between vehicle and environment. They like the combination of both, and hard surface could really be applied to both. It's very straightforward in terms
Yeah.
of it's not a completely separate workflow from doing science, like sci-fi to realistic. It's very similar, more similar than people think. All of the joints and stuff in Star Citizen work as if they're real, and they usually reference on like real military planes or like just general mechanical work. Um, but yeah,
Yeah, it's definitely a really deep subject.
yes, it's
Just
way too deep for just like me to sort of answer. There's probably loads of people that can
yeah,
give different opinions on that. But of course, all this is just my opinion and just my sort of
yeah.
thoughts on it.
Another a question I had was how do you how do you see the workflows uh, in general, every workflow in general, but maybe vehicle art and environments like changing with obviously AI and just like more machine learning type of stuff
Mm,
bringing it.
yeah,
I'm not sure if anything like that's been brought in at Cloud Imperium, but
thankfully not.
yeah,
I'm fully aware. And it's sort of one of those things where it's a tricky topic. Like it's sort of difficult to say not to worry about it, but in my head, I don't. because no matter what I do, it won't change it. It's a tricky one. Like, thankfully, we've got a lot of companies at the moment standing up against that sort of thing. By the way, I mean complete against of AI in general. That's my
Yeah.
personal standpoint on that. You know, but no, thankfully at the moment we have not a CIG. And it's a really good value. We're seeing it now where there's a utmost value on human made work, even if it's worse than the AI counter product. Which is never usually the case anyway, because there's actually like sort of personality in that person's work that usually AI can't really get.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a tricky question, to be fair. I'm not that clued up on the entire subject as a whole, so I can't really answer that properly, if you get what I mean. But
Mm.
yeah, for sure. Like, frankly, at the moment, though, Cloud, there's nothing like that has even been discussed. So
All right, that sounds good. It was just
yeah.
it was interesting because we had in my class we had a texture artist come in, and he was saying, hey, he's seeing some really interesting workflows, and they're kind of starting to integrate like texture art workflows
Mm.
using kind of like, because like if you have like a picture of a material you want to tile, but it's not he was like, yeah, the Midjourney does that really well, and
Mm.
it's a bit scary from a student standpoint, like
Yeah.
with layoffs and everything like that, and then also because AI is it's definitely not going to completely replace people, but it's gonna make everything just slightly harder for students, I think. And
No, absolutely. You're completely correct in that. I would say so anyway. It's a bit of a tricky one. I mean, sort of a good way I think of it is, from what I've been told, is that at the end of the day, when you put in like, I speak a lot with, you know, like directors and leads, and usually the feedback is like, I think AI at the moment is very good at giving really broad sort of changes to anything. However, you really ask it to do something really small, it fails. And like from what I've heard from people in the industry is that it if you're art director and you talk to them, it's very much easier to you to change something really specific than AI can at the moment. This is a bit of a tricky one. I can't really fully explain as I'm just so not clued up on this whole subject in
yeah,
general. But I'm aware of, like, even like at the end of university, there is jobs, there is careers to be had. I think, you know, is it a bubble? I don't know. Who knows? This is a bit of a tricky one. It's no one's really right or wrong. AI is very much just like the sort of there's not enough about it currently. In my personal opinion, especially in terms of the games devs, because you see a lot of companies sort of advocating never using it. Some already are. It's fine, but like a lot of these AI things as well, we still haven't seen the full, like, what that's gonna be like. It's very much like, oh,
yeah,
an AI game studio. It's like it still hasn't released anything. Like, it's still not a thing. It's very much still all in the air of what's actually gonna happen. You
yeah,
know, but honestly, the hope, like, it's a bit of like a deep, philosophy thing maybe. Like, in my head, I've never really looked at anything like this pessimistically, because I mean, what good does that do? All you can do is try your best, right? It's a bit of a tricky
yeah,
one to sort of put it in the back of your head, but at the end of the day, if you really want something, you'll get it. Especially in art, from what I feel, there's still so much out there. It's still, if you love it, if you put in the graft, put in the time, like the passion, it's all there for the taking. Truly, it's a bit sucky at the moment, especially in the games industry. A lot of it is really pessimistic and quite upsetting for sure. But there's probably statistics out there, like, like from what I've seen, that it might be flattening out. Is the worst yet to come? Is it over? At the end of the day,
yeah,
it's not our jobs to sort of worry about that. It's our jobs. It's your university, right? This is really what I want to do. It doesn't matter, like, if it's all crumbling. As long as I put in my all, there will be something at the
yeah,
end of it for me. And that was my personal, like, because at the end of university, this AI really started to explode as well. Even in my second year. And like, it's a bit of a tricky one. It's easy for me to say, but truly, I've been there. Just there is something out there, like, for yourself in terms of art wise. I hope to put like a bit of a more positive spin on it. It's because at the end of the day, if I was to come in here and say everything's fucked, it's all going to hell, what good does that do? Nothing really, right?
Yeah,
You know, at the end of the day, we're still gonna go and just do what we need to do, which is art, which is what we all love, and hopefully, hopefully things turn out all right in that sort of regard. But yeah,
yeah. I like getting everybody's opinion on it where I can, because it's such like
yeah,
a weird, just random issue that's just arose out of nowhere. I feel like.
absolutely true. Like, I mean, like it has been around for some time, obviously not to the
Yeah,
extent of now, but you know, just at the end of the day, at the moment, it's just a tool that's used maybe by some artists to sort of further develop and propel their own work. You know, like maybe one day it'll just be used strictly for like read Apollo or strictly for UVing, like all these tasks that no one really likes to do. That's a good way to use it. It's just a tool. You know, like cloud, we have tools for everything that help everything. But at the end of the day, it's sort of it is a bit of a tricky one. But no, it's good you asked that question though. It's I could assume you probably get mixed sort of thoughts and opinions on it, but my personal things is just even if it all looks bad, stay positive. Truly.
yeah. All right. I think we'll leave it there.
Yeah.
Because it's getting quite late.
Yes, it is.
Well,
Blimey. Yeah.
um, but yeah, thank you very much for joining us. It's been
Yeah,
a
of
pleasure to
course.
have you and hear all your insights and stuff. If anybody's got any more questions, I'm pretty sure they're free to ask you in Discord.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I'll still be around for Discord, so
Yeah.
just pop me. I'm not disappearing.
All right. Okay. Right.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Cameron.
Thank you very much, everyone.
All right. Thanks.
Bye.